Hello everybody, I hope you're all doing well today. Like many of us that have woken up to the lies we live, we replaced our high school indoctrination with common sense. And today I'm going to use that common sense to prove two prostitutes of science wrong. In fact, I don't even have to prove them wrong. These so-called scientists claim to have done an experiment that proves rockets work in space. Let's check their experiment out. First, here we have Cody's lab. Cody has built his infinite space in a 50-gallon steel pressurized container. And notice I said infinite space in a container. Okay, and this is his control. There's no vacuum in this container right now. He's got a rocket in there on a spindle that's going to spin around, and he's going to show you his control.
In 3, 2, 1. Well, that made a bit of noise, didn't it? Let's see what happened in there.
Okay, great. His rocket works in his infinite space chamber without a vacuum. So, let's fast forward and see his test with a vacuum.
Scraps of stuff.
Now, I don't know about you, but I know this pump can't replicate vacuum of space. The vacuum of space is much stronger than this or anybody else can recreate in their backyard. Let's move on.
Alright, let's let that pull most of the air out. So I'm sitting here vacuuming and vacuuming, and the pressure is not dropping down to the 25 inches of mercury that it normally does. And then I realized, it's raining. The
pressure's not dropped down low enough to get even close to the low pressure in space.
Pressure's low today. 25 inches is no longer the minimum. Anyway, now that we're under vacuum, let's plug it in and see what happens. Let's turn off the pump here.
Now, I don't know about you, but you can't turn off the vacuum of infinite space. So why do people turn off the vacuum when they do this experiment? Is it so the gas of the rocket can fill up their small chamber? Because that rocket will probably put out as much gas as the air he pulled out. So remember that as we continue. And for all I know, he capped off the bottom of that brass tubing going into his vacuum chamber. You know, there's no balloon in there to show us there's a true vacuum taking place. You can be fooled by gauges. Mythbusters did it.
All right. In 3, 2, 1.
You had to plug it in again.
I didn't hear anything happen.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean nothing did, because maybe the sound was completely blocked.
Oops.
Alrighty. Should be able.
Now we'll listen to his theory of why that didn't work.
But it didn't ignite and push itself around the chamber. How about that? So the igniter fired, but the rocket failed to burn or produce thrust. And you might have noticed that I didn't use the little plastic plugs that come with the motor. Now let's try it with the plug in place. So let's stick this in there, and let's insert the plug. And for good measure, I've added some glue over top of the plug. So now that I've confined it, let's see how it does.
Same results. Now I want to point out, let's pretend he can get this rocket lit. That doesn't prove rockets work in space, because it is the argument that Newton's third law, or I call it the third lie, because that's exactly what it is what's propelling the rocket. But that's false. A rocket works off thrust. It needs an atmosphere to push against, or walls, like the walls of his infinite space here. So let's see what this clown does now that he can't get the rocket lit.
This is designed for sea level or atmospheric use. You see the pressure is released far too quickly.
Let me back that up because we missed something
This
here
in
real
there.
important.
So, now that I've confined it,
Let me get to the right
honestly,
spot.
I was expecting it
Here
to
we
work
go.
that time, but I guess it makes sense. This motor is not designed to run in a vacuum. This is designed for sea level or atmospheric use. You see the pressure is released far too quickly, and the gunpowder inside can't sustain a burn. So what I need to do is figure out a way to keep the pressure up long enough for the gunpowder to get going and start pressurizing itself. So this is what I've come up with. I have sealed everything inside of a little plastic bottle, as you can see. The igniter and everything's inside. Now hopefully the air pressure around the motor will stay high enough, long enough.
Okay, this prostitute of science is pulling a Mythbusters. His theory failed, so he's doing whatever he has to do to replicate the results he wants. So he takes a non-space rocket, an atmospheric rocket, and puts it in an atmosphere chamber. This isn't a vacuum, folks. This is deception. It's deception. He's creating an atmosphere for the rocket to work. So let's see what happens here. Oh, I also want to point out he invented new rockets. Have you all ever heard of a rocket that's for an atmosphere and a non-atmosphere rocket? No, we have one kind of rocket, not two kinds. One for space and one for Earth. That's nonsense. If that's the case, we would have never made it to the moon. Pure, utter nonsense. These people are just prostituting themselves. They're either duped or they're paid to sell you lies. So let's move on to his experiment.
For the motor to fully ignite. And then hopefully this little hot glue plug will actually blow out and allow the rocket to continue. Once again under vacuum, let's see what happens.
Once again, not even close to the vacuum of space. Not even close. Let's keep going.
Turning on the motor in 3, 2, 1. I think something moved that time. Did the pressure gauge jump? Or drop? Or increase? It looks like it did.
Yeah, it did, because your volume of space is pretty freaking small compared to your rocket. You failed to scale this down properly. Let's keep going on.
So that's how much gas the motor produced.
Great! He got a rocket to light in a semi-quasi vacuum chamber. What he calls infinite space. The only problem is with this, he got it to light using a pressurized container. Once it lit, the rocket is pushing off the walls of his infinite space. So this whole experiment is crap. It's garbage. It's pseudoscience. That's what it is. Now let's listen. Now let's watch this other guy here. He's gonna prove himself a liar too. In fact, both of these videos debunk each other. Let's watch this clown. Warped perception. Let's listen to him.
I was scrolling through the comments section of our see-through model rocket engine video that we uploaded the other day, and a few comments there caught my attention. Apparently, the same people that think that the Earth is flat and rockets can't fly in space also think that a rocket can't burn in a vacuum. The words hoax, space flight, moon landing, the Earth is flat were a few of the words being thrown around in there. So I'm going to run this model rocket engine in this giant vacuum tube and let you be the judge.
He calls this a giant vacuum tube. If this thing was under a proper vacuum, it's going to shatter. So let's check out his giant vacuum chamber. Let's go ahead and fast forward this garbage now that you see his giant vacuum chamber. His infinite space.
Alright. Yeah. This. Alright.
Okay, what he's done here is he's attached the rocket to the spring. He's got the coil, and he's going to attach the coil to the wall of the tubes and prove that thrust works in a vacuum. And that's the whole issue. Thrust needs an atmosphere or a wall to push off of. So let's see this experiment he does. And I'm going to have you pay real close attention. I'm going to full screen this too.
That's pretty sinister.
Sinister.
Alright, that looks just about good there. That looks nice. We got our...
Now let's check that out. Let's check that out. Infinite space here. Now if this guy had a real strong vacuum on this thing, this little plastic tube would crack. You and I know it. If he had the vacuum of space in that chamber, it would shatter, crumble. Now let's keep going here and pay real close attention.
Camera's all set up. Our chamber is in a vacuum.
Yeah, that's proof it's in a vacuum. Showing you a meter is proof it's in a vacuum. For all I know, and in fact, I'll bet you $10 he capped off the inside of that brass tubing with a cap.
And we are ready to roll it. Godspeed.
Pay attention.
Model rocket engine in a vacuum.
Did you see that? Let me go back. Let me get it in a spot here and slow it down. Slow motion. Alright, let me slow down the video here. Speed 0.25. Let's pay attention to this. Pay close attention. Dramatization. Stop. You see all that smoke coming out, escaping the chamber? This guy's a fucking fraud. He knew that rocket wasn't going to work in that chamber. So he made sure there wasn't a vacuum in it. Now next off, the volume of this chamber is real small. That rocket will exceed the volume in the chamber with no problems, plenty to spare. In fact, if you didn't have the caps taped on with duct tape, they'd be on the ground by now. But once the smoke escaped the tube, you've exposed this dude for the fucking fraud he is. He's another prostitute pushing pseudoscience. And he's even duping his fucking daughter. Can you imagine that? Could you imagine that? And these guys proved each other wrong. They debunked each other. They debunked their whole scientific experiment. Now let's look at this clown at the end. He's so happy. He's science. Let me get it to the right spot. Yeah, it's going to mess up here. Let me get it off the slow-mo here. Get it to the right spot. The normal. Here we go.
Stuff in there. And in a vacuum. It was gone. So I found because the entire
listen to this count,
which usually lasts about 8 seconds, burned up in about literally 1 second in a vacuum. It was gone. So I found that amazing. It was the exact opposite of what everybody thought it was going to do, which was not burn at all. And let's take a look inside there. Look at that. A lot of debris, all kinds of stuff in there. And yeah. Our GoPro survived. A little bit charred up, but it survived. Okay, open it up there. I'm gonna have you give it a little blow. Here, check out all this smoke that's in there. And ready? Go. Wow, that smells good. Thanks to...
Now, did you see the end cap there? The thrust was pushing off the end cap. Again, the argument isn't, will rockets light in space? The argument is it Newton's third lie that's propelling it? Or is it the thrust pushing against an atmosphere or a solid surface like this clown's end cap on his infinite space vacuum chamber? What a bunch of crap. These guys are disgusting. Now let me tell you what's wrong with all of this. This whole scientific experiment. Anybody that tries this, it's crap from the beginning. First off, none of these guys created infinite space. They had to scale it down real small. And they made sure they put a huge rocket in this small space. They didn't scale down the rocket. I mean, to scale this down to where it's a scientifically legitimate experiment, you'd have to find a rocket about the size of a piece of dust. And even then, it's too big for infinite space. Also, you need to create the vacuum of space. That little quarter horsepower motor ain't going to create the vacuum of space. If he would have recreated vacuum in space, any of these clowns, their vacuum chamber wouldn't be a vacuum chamber anymore. It's silliness. These guys are frauds. Why don't they instead try to prove that rockets work off of Newton's third law and not off of pushing off of an atmosphere? That's the question here. Because this science experiment, no matter whose does it, is faulty from the get-go. From the get-go. So again, I use my common sense to expose these frauds for what they are. Science frauds, prostitutes, pseudoscientists. It's time to wake up, slaves. Good day.
All the viewers for asking for this particular episode, because this one was really good. This one was a lot of fun. Surprisingly, after this entire engine burned, we still have vacuum left in our vacuum chamber, which was impressive. So I hope you like this video. This is a great subject. Keep the ideas coming. A lot of these ideas, if you haven't figured out already, we do listen to our audience, and we